Hey everyone, welcome back to the TILTEDU channel. So in the previous videos, we started getting into the game development part of this course and we installed Unity onto our PCs. Now with Unity installed, let's get into the interface of Unity and get familiar with the program before we start our development journey. So without further ado, let's get into it. When you first open your Unity project, it should look something like this. I know it's a lot of windows, but don't get scared as we going over each of these windows in detail. So let's start with the biggest window of them all. So if you remember in the Blender part of the course, we covered each window specifically. So just like in Blender, Unity also has these windows that have similar properties. Some are slightly different, some are really different, some are somewhat similar as well. A window that is similar in Unity as well as Blender is the scene view or the viewport in Blender and the scene view when it comes to Unity. So this is where all the action happens. So if you're making a level for your 3D game or even your 2D game, this is where you would set up your whole level. And to navigate inside of this scene view, it is a little bit different when it comes to Unity. What you have to do is hold on right mouse button, and when you hold it, you can see the icon changes from the mouse cursor into an I shape. That means you have switched over, and you can use the WASD keys just like you would use in an FPS game or a third person running game. You can use these keys to navigate inside of the scene. You can see I'm going far away and I'm coming closer towards these icons. As well as I can use the Q key to go down and the E key to go up. So WASD, W for forward, S for backwards, A for left, D for right, and Q for down, and E for up. So those are the shortcuts. And this only works while holding down the right mouse button. And just like in Blender, you can actually use the mouse scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out as well. If you want to stand in a single position and pan around the scene, you can just hold the right mouse button and see. You can look up, down, sideways. So just like in Blender, if you want to see a specific perspective, so this is a 3D scene, so there are 3 axes. So if you want to see a specific side or a specific perspective, you can use this gizmo over here to see it from that side or that perspective. So I'm looking at from the Z axis. If I want to go into the X axis, I can do that. And if I want to see a top view, I can use the Y axis. And I can come down as well. A major difference when it comes to Unity is the up axis is actually Y, but in Blender it's Z. There is a difference when it comes to this axis orientation. Now moving on to the hierarchy. So if you remember, inside the Blender part of this course, we explored the outliner. Basically, just like the outliner, in Unity's version, it is called as the hierarchy. So hierarchy is a list view of all the things you can see inside your 3D scene view. So right now, you only have 2 things inside of our scene view, which comes default when you create a new project, that is the main camera and directional light. So just like in Blender, when you first create a scene, you have a default cube, a light, and a camera. That is what the hierarchy is used for, and you can search the hierarchy to find a specific object. So if I want to see the main camera and there are a bunch of other objects in my scene, I can just type in for my main camera and you can see it gets highlighted. So the hierarchy is basically a list view of all the objects in your 3D scene. Now moving on to the next window, that is the inspector, which is currently empty. Now that is because the inspector is a properties tab. So if I were to select an object, you can see I'm getting a bunch of properties that I can change. So just like in Blender, there is a properties tab. In Unity, we have the inspector. So right now I'm selecting the camera. So I'm just gonna select the directional light. And you can see there are a bunch of settings I can change over here. So I can even change the color, but it won't affect the scene because there is nothing in the scene to react to it. So what I'll do is go into the inspector, right click and create a 3D object. I'll just create a basic cube. And you can see it has created a basic cube. And if I go back and change the color of the directional light, you can see it is affecting the object as well. And if I want to increase the intensity, you can see it's getting overexposed. I can even change the color as well. So the inspector handles all the properties of a certain object inside your 3D scene. And we'll go over all these properties or all these components when we get to the component part. Now moving on to the next window, that is the project window. So as the name suggests, this is a view of all the assets, all the images, all the 3D assets or 2D assets or all the scripts, everything that is contained inside your project. This is a view of all that. So right now we have a scene folder in which we have our default scene. So in Unity, all these sessions or all these assets are stored inside a scene. So just think of it as our save file where we can add and change everything. And after we finished it, we can just Ctrl S to save it and it will be stored inside that scene file. So as an example, when you are playing a game Imagine one level is a single scene. When you finish that level and a new level is loaded up, it is loading a different scene altogether. So that is why it is stored in different scenes. So we'll go over scenes and how you can create them and how you can launch different scenes when we get into the game development part. As far as the project window is concerned, this is where we see all the things we use to create this project, be it assets, be it 3D models, scripts, or any other add-ons we are adding on. It should be displayed inside of the project window. Now moving on to the next window, that is the console window. And all these windows are dockable. So if I want to take my console window and put it over here, I can do that. And if I want it back over here, I can do that as well. So you can customize your version of Unity to your specific needs. Now, when it comes to the console window, it handles all the code execution, all the errors, all the warnings when you're creating your scripting part of the project. So when you're creating a script and you get an error, it will be showcased over here in the console window. So to get a good grasp on that, I'll just create a script and show you. And to create a script, all you need to do is right click on the project window, go to create and create a C# script. Now moving on to the next window that is close to the project window, that is the console window. And all these windows are dockable, by the way. You can just take this window and put it over here. And if you don't like it there, you can just bring it back over here. You can customize your version of Unity as per your needs. So just going to bring it back over here. And when it comes to the console window, this is where all the code execution or errors or warnings are handled. So when you're creating a script for your game, if you get a specific error, it will be showcased over here. So what I'll do is create a script and make an error, and we'll see how it is showcased. To create a script, you can just right click on the project window, go into C# script. So in Unity, coding is done in C#. I'll just rename the script as TST and open it. Double click to open it, and it's going to open in Visual Studio. And I'll just do a basic error. I'll just delete this bracket. So all that, I'll get a error and I can just showcase it. I'll just save the script and you can see it is getting an error that is expected. So curly brackets define the end of a script as well as the beginning statement of a script. So if you don't have that, you'll get an error, and you can see it is showcased in the console window. Now moving on to the next window that is close to the console window, that is the game view. As soon as I switch over to the game view, you can see we are getting a perspective directly from the camera. So if I were to select the camera to what you would get inside of Blender. So if I were to move it, you can see it is also changing. So this is the camera perspective or the user perspective. So when you're finished building your game and a person is playing, this window or the output that is generated inside this window is what the user will see. This is like the camera view. So if you're using Blender, this would be the final camera output. But when it comes to Unity, this is the final game output. So as you can see, I'm moving around the camera and it is affecting how I can see this cube. So think of the game window as the final user perspective. So whatever you want the user to see inside of your final game, it has to be showcased inside the game window, or else it won't be visible for the user as well. So if I were to move this cube behind the camera, you can actually see in the game view, it is empty because it is behind the camera and it is not rendering or it's not visible to the camera. Whatever you want the user to see is in front of this camera, and it's also visible in the game view. So that was just a basic overview of all the windows inside of Unity. Now we'll just explore a little bit further into the component system, as well as all these properties that you can find on the inspector. So if you remember, we created a cube to show the effect of the directional light. Now, if I deselect the cube, you can see the properties is no longer there. Now, so I'm just gonna reselect the cube. Of Unity, these properties are referred to as components, and there are a bunch of components stacked together to form this certain object. As you can see, in this cube, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this cube, we have 5 individual components that are the transform component, the mesh filter component, the mesh render component, the box collider component, and the material. So I'll just explain all these components briefly. So the transform component, as the name suggests, handles all the transform inputs. So if I want to move this cube into a specific direction, so I'm moving this cube on the x-axis, and if I want to move this cube on the y-axis, I can change this value over here and in the z as well. So positional, rotational, and scale transformations are handled inside of the transform component. So if I want to rotate, I can just add onto this. If I want to rotate in the y-axis, in the Z as well as I can scale it onto a specific axis. So if I want to make this cube a little bit longer, and if I want to make this cube a little bit thicker as well, I can do this by editing the scale transform value of this cube. So I'm just going to reset everything. So there are two options to resetting all these transform. You can just manually do it, or you can just click on this icon and reset. Now when you reset, it goes into the center of the scene. And if you want to move a little bit closer without zooming in, all you have to do is press F on your keyboard to highlight your object at the center of your scene. So as I explained, transform components handle the positional, rotational, and the scale transformation of the certain object that you selected. Now when it comes to the mesh filter, if I were to select this icon right here, where you can see in the selected cube, a little bit of data is shown. So the cube right now that we have selected has 24 vertices and 12 triangles. Now, if I want to visually see that, I would just click on this button and go into shaded wireframe. So this is the geometrical data that is required to assemble this cube inside of Unity. Now, if I were to switch over into a capsule, you can see the mesh data is changed. I have 550 vertices and 832 triangles. And I can do the same for a cylinder, a sphere, a plane, or even a quad. Okay. So all the geometrical data that is needed for Unity to understand how this mesh is assembled is stored inside the mesh filter. So now moving on to the mesh render. Now the mesh filter actually gave Unity all the geometrical data that is required to assemble this object inside of Unity. Now to visualize this object inside of Unity, to add color and how it reacts to light as well, all those data is handled inside of the mesh render. So if I were to disable the mesh render right here, you can see the whole cube disappears. As you can see, when I turn it back on, it appears back on. And I'm going to switch over into shaded, select the cube. So as I mentioned earlier, all the visual data that is needed for an object to appear inside of Unity is stored in the mesh render component of Unity. Now coming on to the second last component of the list is the box collider. So this component handles all the collisions. When I say collisions, just put out your hand and try to touch it. So if I were to do this right now, you can see when my finger reaches this specific point, it stops because I have an object or my other hand over here, and it's interacting with this hand and it's stopping this finger right here. Now inside of Unity, have this specific component added to a certain object to calculate this collision, or else the object won't calculate this collision. So if I have like a character that is running, that object or that character needs to have a collider so that it can detect the floor that it's running on, and if it's interacting with another character or another surface, it needs to have a collider on its body to determine the collision between the character and the other object. So all that is handled inside this collider component, and you can see there are a variety of colliders right now. Since we created a cube, we have a box collider, but if we go into the add components menu and search in collider, you can see we have a bunch of colliders. Now based on the shape of the object or the mesh, you can add that specific type of collider. Now I'll show you a basic workflow on how collisions are detected when we get to that part. Coming over to the last component inside of our inspector, if we go into the material window, you can see everything is grayed out, and I can't really change it because you can't edit the default material that comes with an object. Since we created this cube inside of Unity, it adds a default material to the object and we can't really edit that one. What we can do is create a new material by going into the project window, right clicking, just like we created our script. Go into create and go into material and create, and I'm just going to call it cube. And there are two ways of adding a material to an object. You can go into the mesh render view and add a material by dragging this and dropping it over there, or you can just simply drag it and drop it onto the object. And you can see it didn't really change anything, because if you go into the material, it is still white, but if you were to change this color, you can see it is affecting the object. So the material component handles all the material inputs of a certain object. So if you want to create an object that is shiny and reflective, all you have to do is turn up the smoothness of that object. But if you want to make an object that is metallic, you can just increase the metallic value. And there are a bunch of other nodes as well that we'll get into when we assemble our 3D object that we created inside of Blender. When we add it back into Unity, we'll explore these other slots as well. But just as a brief, the material component handles all the material properties of a certain object. It is different from the mesh render, so that is just a visual look of that certain object. But when it comes to material properties, you can edit these values so that it resembles a certain material that already exists in our real world. So that was just a basic overview on the interface as well as the component system inside of Unity. So in the upcoming videos, we'll dive much more deeper into the level designing as well as development part of this whole course. So make sure you like this video and share this video with your friends who are interested in game development or 3D asset creation. And make sure also you subscribe and turn on the bell notifications to get notified whenever we post a new video. So until then, bye.